Welcome back to Politics Nation. Ron Paul has a lot of explaining to do. This week, newsletters were surfaced saying that Ron Paul was the publisher in the 1980s and 1990s. And after they were unearthed, we found they were filled with racist and bigoted rhetoric. In one article, the unnamed author writes, "I think we can safely assume that 95% of black males in Washington are semi-criminal or entirely criminal." And another unnamed author questioned whether the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was a setup by the Israeli Mossad. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are dozens of newsletters with the name Ron Paul on it, filled with racist, anti-Semitic, and homophobic rhetoric. Ron Paul is denying that he ever wrote them or read them.
Everybody knows I didn't write them, and the sentiments of
But who are the writers? And why were you on TV bragging about your newsletters in 1995?
I also put out a political type of business investment newsletter. It sort of covered all these areas. And it covered a lot about what was going on in Washington and financial events.
Your newsletters were about business and investments? Doesn't pass the smell test to me. Joining me now, Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor, and Bob Franken, a King Features syndicated columnist. Thank you both for being with me tonight.
Thanks, Ray.
Jonathan, do you believe Paul's take on these newsletters?
No, I don't. The interview he gave yesterday where he pulled off his mic and said, you know, I didn't write them, somebody else wrote them, I disavowed them, I've answered these questions, now let's move on. Sorry, but that's not good enough. It might be good enough when you're Congressman Ron Paul or when you're Dr. Ron Paul, but when you are a candidate for the nomination of a major political party in the United States and could theoretically, technically speaking, be president of the United States.
So he's the front runner in Iowa.
Well, yes, he is the front runner in Iowa, and if you're going to be that person, then you have to withstand the scrutiny that comes with it. And when you have to answer for the things that are under his name, he has to do more than just say, well, I disavow it and let's just move on.
Well, I think, and you know, I was on Morning Joe this morning, Bob, and we talked about it. Many of us, all of us, me, have said things that we either felt was distorted or that we had to say we were wrong. But he's not saying that. He's saying, I didn't know anything about it after he did know about it. And these were printed under his name on his newsletter where he made money from them. So well, you're not even dealing with whether the statements are bigoted, and clearly they are. He's acting like he had nothing to do with them.
Well, first of all, if he didn't know about something that was being put out in his name of such an inflammatory nature, chances are one would question his qualifications to be a chief executive or the executive of a janitor service, for that matter. That's number one. Number two, if he didn't write this, he had an association with people who are calling themselves paleo-libertarianists. That's even hard to say. Another way to define that would be knuckle-dragging, paleo whatever. The point is that they were expressing views that are like at the dredges of the libertarian movement. They are disavowed even by people who are libertarians in the mainstream, if there is such a thing. And the fact that Ron Paul would even be associated with these people then and now raises questions about whether he is socially up to this time in history.
Now, Jonathan, 2 points here. Let me show some of what was on these newsletters, because it's not just one or two slip of the tongues in 30 years. This is like some of the most ugly things you could think of. He wrote, order was only restored in L.A., this is after the riots, when it came time for blacks to pick up their welfare checks. Martin Luther King was a world-class philanderer who beat up his paramours. Israel is an aggressive national socialist state. AIDS patients should not be allowed to eat in restaurants because AIDS can be transmitted by saliva. If you've ever been robbed by a black teenage male, you know how unbelievably fleet of foot they can be. I mean, on and on and on. And he says he doesn't know anything about them. He didn't read them. He is not identified then who wrote them if he didn't. I mean, and he's the let me show you the poll. Because people might say, why are you talking about this, Reverend Al? Because he's the front runner in Iowa. And according to this poll, Iowa State University Gazette, KCRG poll, Ron Paul's at 28, Newt Gingrich at 25, Mitt Romney at 18. He's front runner in a caucus 2 weeks away, and he can't identify who wrote him. It's under his name on his newsletter that he was making money.
Well, look, all those sentiments that you just read used to be the fringe. It used to be the ideas and thoughts and ugliness of people who stood on the periphery, on the edge of political acceptance. And now here we have them embodied in a man who is the front runner in Iowa, who could upend this entire race if he does win Iowa. People are talking about now, if he wins the Iowa caucuses, what does that mean for the relevance of the Iowa caucuses going forward? And what does that mean for a Republican Party that is increasingly marginalizing itself from the mainstream of American political thought when they're going after gays and lesbians, going after immigrants, going after African Americans, and all sorts of, however you want to look at the ways that in terms of policy and stances, how are they going to remain a relevant major party in this country if they keep nominating or keep putting at tops of polls candidates who are on the outside of the mainstream of American political thought?
Bob, if Ron Paul goes down, because he's getting hit from all sides, not only on this newsletter but other issues, who does it benefit? Does it benefit Newt, who's right behind him now in Iowa, or does it benefit Romney if Ron Paul pulls it out in Iowa and sets up Romney with a vote in New Hampshire, because people will come out saying, no, we can't have this man as the leader of the ticket?
Well, in the latter case, if Ron Paul, in fact, does well in Iowa and gets some momentum, it probably bodes well for Romney in the Republican primary. But I think that people of goodwill in the United States are going to say, what kind of cuckoo birds are these people putting out there as representatives of the Republican Party? We're talking now about racism, flat-out racism. Right now, these days, Ron Paul gussies up his point of view by saying he's just really against any involvement by the federal government. Well, and I'm getting an Al Sharpton territory here, that was the argument that the states' writers made when they were trying to maintain segregation in the 1950s in the South. And it was the argument that the slave owners made when they were fighting the Civil War against the North. They called it an argument about states' rights. It was an argument about maintaining slavery. Unfortunately, apparently, some Americans haven't come much further than that.
Well, Bob, you said it well. Thank you for joining us tonight. Jonathan, stay with me. Ahead, Willard's refusing to release his tax form. I wonder what he's afraid of. We'll find out.